Welcome to Known and Trusted. Here we listen to a single lived story of grooming, not as a tragedy to revisit, but as wisdom to carry forward. In this one-time conversation, hindsight becomes foresight, offering new eyes to see what often hides in plain sight.
The reason that we do fire drills in school is to develop some muscle memory. I get up, I go here, I follow the teacher, I go out here in the playground. And it all seems silly, but there's a method to that madness. You learn that a trusted family friend and a member of law enforcement has been sexually assaulting your daughter. Ain't no playbook for that.
Would you like to begin by telling us a little bit about what life was like before the grooming ever occurred?
Yeah, sure. Frankly, life was blissfully unaware that there could actually be people who might have a positioning themselves as wanting the best for our child and supporting her and helping us, who actually did not have our child's best intent at heart. And so we're just completely oblivious. Sadly, we found out the hard way that that is not, that is.
And would you say that most people are oblivious to grooming before it ever strikes in their lives?
I, I, I have to assume so. My wife and I are, I tend to think that we're fairly average. You know, we are certainly engaged in our children's lives. We went to parent-teacher conferences. We took them to sporting activities. We had, I think we had good, healthy conversations. We had good, healthy relationships with our kids. But I, I think that most parents, it's just not top of mind. You know, we all get that book when we're expecting. I want to expect when you're expecting, and we get the book from Dr. Spock and all of that good stuff. And so we start learning about how to change a diaper, how to select car seats, things like that. And so important stuff, but we don't have conversations about the reality that there are people out there who want to hurt our kids. I think we all grew up in the age of stranger danger, and be worried about the people lurking in the shadows down at the park, and don't take candy from strangers and things like that. And the reality is that over 90% of sexual assaults are committed by somebody that is known by the victim. That's the Boy, we don't talk about that enough.
Well, I agree with you on that front, where you and I are part of the solution, hopefully, to make a little bit of a dent in that problem.
I would like to think so, but yeah, there's unfortunately, we need more people helping to make that dent. Yep.
So can you describe what took place within your family?
Sure. So my youngest daughter was raped by a classmate, and her freshman year, he was an upperclassman, and like a lot of kids in that situation, she was ashamed. She felt that she was somewhat responsible, and she didn't want to come forward and share that with us. And as a result of that rape, she began to experience PTSD and fell into a depression and began making some poor decisions. At one point, there was a suicide attempt, and that we could obviously see what was going on, but that really got our attention. And she finally did disclose what had happened, and we began to, we got involved, we got engaged. So we started getting her into therapy. We began to address the situation. She was not comfortable pressing charges. She did not want to move forward with that, and we respected that. So we, in addition to the therapist and really making sure she felt supported and whatnot. We wanted to get her connected with people that we felt could have a positive influence. And we were looking for ways to help get her more engaged because she had begun to disconnect from school and as well as us. And so we were able to get her connected with a community initiative from the police department that were community walks. And they were simply that, just walking through the community with members of the police department, as well as other civic leaders. There were community activists, there were pastors and social workers and whatnot, as well as citizens who wanted to help to make their community better. And so my daughter and I began to attend these weekly walks. And one of the police officers on that walk wanted to, after a couple of weeks, took an interest in our daughter and wanting to help her with her struggles. And we disclosed to him that what had happened, that she had been raped, that she had fallen into a depression, there was a suicide attempt. And so that's why we were participating in the walks. At that point, my wife and I were thrilled. Here is an officer, a school resource officer at that, who had taken an interest in her and wanted to help her and told us how he understood what she was going through, that he had his own challenges as a child, that he had been sexually assaulted when he was younger, that he had bounced around in foster care, and he wanted to help her. And so my wife and I were thrilled. This is the sort of thing we were looking for. And so on a weekly basis, she was really excited about participating in these walks and really felt a sense of community, not just with this officer, but everyone on the walks. And they began to develop a friendship. And I was in complete support of this. This is a police officer. He's a school resource officer. This is what he does. And so over the period, over the course of several months, they began to spend more time together. Sometimes he would offer to take her out for ice cream or take her bowling after these community walks. So I would bring her to the walks. She and I would join the walks, and then at the end of it, he would say, "Hey, happy to take her out for some ice cream or bowling or whatnot." And she had been excited about that. Here's an adult, not just an adult, but a police officer that is wanting to spend time with her. And so I had no reason to think otherwise, that this is nothing but a good thing. And so I said, no problem, have fun. Don't forget, you got school in the morning, so make sure that you're home by 9 or 10 o'clock. And I didn't give it a second thought.
Who would?
Yeah, he's telling us all the right things. He's spending time with our daughter. He is reaching out to my wife and I to build a relationship so that we were feeling comfortable. He actually was wanting to get together with me to go out for a beer. I'm into motorcycles. He was into motorcycles, so we would talk about motorcycles. And even though there was 25, 30-year difference between us, I had no reason to think that this is anything other than someone that is wanting to help my daughter. As the months went on, we began to notice a change in our daughter, that she was less enthusiastic about going on the walks. She was, soon after we began the walks, she talked about wanting to become a police officer. She was so excited about this and really enjoyed spending time with all of the officers. And so she, all of a sudden, she began to want to do that. Okay, but then also she didn't want to attend the walks. And every time we would mention the walks, we would ask her about attending them. She began to say, I don't know. And in the beginning, she was pushing me to want to attend them, and then it became, hey, it's Thursday night. Let's go to the walks. And after about 6-7 months, she finally disclosed to my wife and I and her older sister that he had been sexually assaulting her. At that point, everything changed for us in an incredibly profound way.
What were some of the things that changed as a family system once that information came out?
Boy.
How much time do we have?
Yeah. By that time, she was really spiraling. So we began to see progress. We began to see her engaging, feeling a little bit better, quite a bit better. And we were starting to see that kid that we had seemingly lost. We were starting to see that light coming back to her eye, that sparkle. And then as things progressed, we were beginning to see her falling back into that depression and withdrawing from us. And so once we found out, now all of a sudden my wife and I know why. Here's what's going on. So there's that. But now the family really became really fractured. As soon as she disclosed to us, my wife and I were again all over this and kind of circling the wagons. And fortunately, my daughter, because she had been so desperate to get away from him at the end and was really struggling to do that, and was, as he was continuing the manipulation and reaching out to me and reaching out to my wife to seemingly go around my daughter to let her know that you're not getting rid of me, that was increasing her anxiety. And so she was in a very dark place. Once my wife and I knew what was going on, she wanted to press charges. We immediately began that process. But the decision to press charges, quite frankly, is, I certainly would not say it is just as traumatizing, but boy, it's not too far removed, because you are reliving this horrible experience repeatedly for in our case, for a year and a half, and having to tell strangers and having strangers question you. So it was the PTSD was huge. But now my wife and I are also experiencing our own type of PTSD. It is, we invited this person into our family. It's hard to feel as if we did not facilitate this, as if we didn't have responsibility in this, because I'm her dad. I facilitated these conversations. I said, go ahead and take my daughter out for ice cream. Take her bowling. Have a good time. At one point near the end, shortly before she disclosed what was happening, he called me and he said, hey, I haven't heard from her in a couple of weeks. I want to make sure everything is okay. And I said, well, that's odd. She's upstairs. Let me see what's going on. And so I take the phone into her bedroom and I said, he's asking if you're okay. Do you have a minute to speak to him? And she, without saying a word, stood up, took the phone out of my hands, and closed the door. Boy, you can't, as a dad, it's pretty hard to not feel as if I just facilitated a predator assaulting my daughter. So, because I did. And regardless of the fact of whether or not I knew it, then I'm asking myself, I should have known. I should have been aware of that. It's been 4 years now and almost 5 years now. And I'm well on the other side of this, but I still have moments where I feel some guilt and shame and beat myself up over it. Fortunately, those days are fewer and fewer, but it's still there. As parents, our number one job is to protect our kids, right? And when you don't do that and you drop the ball, it's pretty hard to shake that. And so my wife and I really struggled throughout that process. We're struggling with watching our daughter have to go through this mess, working with the prosecution, dealing with her own PTSD of what happened with this officer, as well as the PTSD from the first rape. And there's also that that feeling that she had of, why didn't you protect me? Well, that's a good question. And that's not an easy one to avoid. Again, we're on the other side of this, but I'd be lying if I did not acknowledge that there are still some days where she struggles just as well. It doesn't go away immediately, and she gets triggered, and sometimes she's reminding us of how we dropped the ball. Fortunately, again, just as my wife and I have made progress, so has she. Healing from a assault and dealing with PTSD is not a linear process. You can take one step forward and 16 back, and it is a journey, to say the very least.
Police officers in all walks of life, in any arena that they work, are respected immediately upon seeing the uniform and seeing their badge. Can you speak to what a resource officer is, a school resource officer, and how that may have led to different risk factors in the case of your family being groomed?
Yeah. So a school resource officer is not always a police officer, but they often are. Police officers who are also school resource officers really play two roles. When they are, when school's in session, they are working with the schools. They'll be assigned to a school, and this is school resource officers, or SROs, are really, we're not around when you and I were in school for the most part, right? So school today and the educational system is very different from what you and I experienced. So SROs are trained, specifically trained to deal with young people. And they are obviously first responders in schools. They are there to keep students safe. They deal with emergencies. They deal with fights. They deal with investigations with students. Obviously, if there are shootings, things of that nature, they are trained to deal with those. Not all schools have SROs, but the schools that do, they are, again, assigned to the school. And so in the cases of police officers who are SROs, when school's not in session, they are doing police work, community police work. And so this SRO they are also trained in developing relationships to build trust with the students so that they are not always viewed as it's a cop, right? And they are trying to break that stereotype of anytime a cop is around means somebody's going to get arrested. Obviously, policing today, there's a spectrum of opinions on them and how they're viewed. So SROs are trying to start them young and break those stereotypes. And so they will engage with students and make a concerted effort to positive influences. So it certainly made sense when we have a school resource officer saying, hey, I want to have fantastic. This is just what we're looking for. And one of the first things he did was he began working on moving their communications to Snapchat. And she was 15 at the time, and so are all about social media and Snapchat. So, yep, no problem, no problem. At one point, he had asked my wife to move the conversations to Snapchat, which she thought was odd. And she
To
said,
move the conversation she was having
that
independently with this
she was
person?
having with him when they would text about how she was doing, or when she would reach out to him asking about additional community resources, things like that. And because we had developed a friendship with him. Again, he's positioning himself as, I want to help. I want to be your daughter's friend. I want to be your friend. So my wife would reach out to him, and at one point early on, he had said, hey, let's move this to Snapchat. Well, my wife was like, well, I'm in my 50s. I'm not a snapper, whatever it is they are. And so she's like, I text. That's what I do. And he dropped it very quickly. He said, hey, no problem. But it was one of those things where it's like, okay, that's weird. Again, he's a cop. He's an SRO. He's working with kids. That would absolutely make sense, right? Because trying to establish relationships and credibility with students, and if he's spending a lot of time in there, maybe it's going to be easier if he's having all communications in Snapchat. I don't know.
Significance. What do you think in retrospect? If a family is listening to this, if a parent's listening to this and they think, I've had somebody or my child has had this experience, why is that a significant step?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because they know what they're doing. There is nothing that predator is doing by chance. Predators have a playbook. And when you and I began speaking about a year ago, I reached out to you right after reading your book, Duck Duck, and I cringed. I was cringing constantly as I read the book because it was like, how could I miss this stuff? I mean, it was almost as if your book was about our story. And so one of the first things that predators are going to do after they have identified their victim, after they have done their homework, they are going to begin that process of controlling the conversation. And they know, he knew that if the conversation is in Snapchat, there's not going to be a record of it. Snapchat makes sense if, let's be honest here, if we are teenagers and we're planning a party with our friends, and we're going to figure out who's going to get the beer, that makes sense, okay? Kids don't want a record of that. For an adult to be engaging in a conversation with a young person where there is not going to be a record of those conversations, that makes no sense. And so the fact that he transitioned very quickly to wanting to move that conversation to Snapchat was not coincidental. It was by design, and because he knew what he was doing here, and we come to find out later, as is the case with most predators, this was not his first victim. That there were several that we know of. How many more were there? We don't know, because he was a police officer. And how many people are going to be nervous, rightfully so, about coming forward about someone in a significant position of authority. So yeah, that was that first step. And again, when I began learning about that playbook, wow, did that just hit home.
Can you speak a little bit about the length of time it took between when she met this officer and when it all came out? What is maybe anybody listening who thinks, well, this takes a really long time or it takes a really short time? The truth is it can really vary. So in your case, what was the length of time that this whole process took to unfold?
Once the conversations moved to Snapchat, and again, we learned all of this through through the case and discussions with our daughter. Once the conversation moved to Snapchat, again, where there's no record, things began to escalate very quickly. The questions began to become very inappropriate very quickly.
Sexual in nature or about drugs, or what kind of inappropriate are we talking for parents who might be concerned?
It started with a what he referred to as a game called 20 questions. And he would begin asking some seemingly harmless questions. They within a week, it very quickly moved to incredibly inappropriate questions. Started out with, you know, are you dating anyone? How far have you gone with your boyfriends? Do you drink? Do you smoke? And so he's dropping these questions, trying to get little bits of information that he's going to be able to use or hold over her head later on. So if they've built a friendship and a trusting relationship, they are he's going to be able to start asking more and more questions. And once it begins to move past some of what's your favorite subject in school, what do you like to do on the weekends, what kind of music do you like, and then it begins to get into much more personal questions about dating and drug and alcohol usage. By then, they have begun to build that trust. And so the moment he gets her to answer a question of, do you smoke? Do you drink? If she answers yes, he's got something on her. But he's not going to use that. He's going to say, I'm a cop, I could turn you in, ha ha ha. And again, that's by design, because what he wants her to know is, it's okay. You can tell me that you drink alcohol, that you smoke cigarettes, you smoke weed, whatever it is. That's okay. I'm not going to tell on you because I'm your friend. And it's just going to escalate from there. And eventually, he's going to be able to use that information against her. But early on, he's going to use that to continue to develop and foster the relationship. And and then it begins very quickly at that point, after he has begun broaching the seemingly harmless but fun questions about alcohol and drug use, then it very quickly began moving towards the inappropriate questions about sexual activity, and whatnot. And they very quickly became inappropriate. Not just about does she have sex with her boyfriend, but remember, he knew that she had been raped. At one point, he asked her if she enjoyed the rape. It was in the context of, hey, does that idea turn you on? Again, let's be mindful of the fact this is a 15-year-old girl.
Child.
Again, child, thank you. 15-year-old child. Hey, have you ever experimented with any of your girlfriends? And so at that point, he's going there with her because he can. Now, make no mistake, right from the get-go, those were not questions that she was comfortable with. She was not enjoying those questions, but what is she going to do? They're at this point, he's starting to remind her that he's a trusted member of law enforcement. He is highly respected. And oh, by the way, I'm also pretty tight with your mom and dad. And I have the influence to get you in trouble. So let's not get any funny ideas. And as this is happening, he's also having incredibly inappropriate conversations with her about his own life. He was married, he had 2 children at that time, was experiencing marital problems, and he was having conversations with her about his relationship. And she's a 15-year-old kid. She doesn't want to hear about this stuff, but she's also kind of feeling stuck at this point. Now what is she going to do? And anytime she begins to try to disconnect from him, he's very quick to remind her, we're special friends, so let's not get any funny ideas. And I need to know where you're at, what's going on, and when I reach out to you, I need you to respond, to let me know what's going on. Don't leave me hanging.
At any point, did you become aware that he, because one of the things that I discuss in Duck Duck Groom, and you and I have talked about previously, is this idea that in stage 3 of forbidden fruits, that the predator is likely to bait a child even further with things that a parent would obviously say, absolutely not, you can't have those things. Are you aware of any drugs or alcohol or substances or materials that he made available to her that may otherwise have not been something that you were either aware of at the time, or that would have seemed in opposition of what a true mentor or a true adult guide may have seen as appropriate?
Yeah, the a lot of times predators will let kids drive their vehicle, or maybe they'll purchase alcohol or purchase drugs, or cigarettes or whatnot. And in my daughter's case, she didn't like alcohol. She did admit to him that she had begun smoking weed, and so he didn't supply those things, but he did ask her, hey, I've never smoked weed. Could you get some so that we could smoke? Yeah. So that put up all sorts of red flags for her, and she said that she never did do that, but he continued to bring that up to her, that he'd like to get high with her. And whether or not he had ever smoked before, we don't know. I mean, lying was certainly his superpower. The small gifts, the illicit things that an adult should not be doing with a child, purchasing alcohol and whatnot. He didn't do a lot of that with her. What he did do was, again, take her bowling, take her for ice cream, have these conversations. It was the gifts thing was not part of that equation.
But one-on-one time was.
Absolutely.
Are you aware of him using any fear tactics? You said earlier that he made it clear that he had befriended you and your wife, and that he had a position of respect within the community. Do you know, in hindsight, if he was ever threatening her, or in any way shaping her ability to tell the truth or come and confide in someone about the situation?
Yeah. He would jokingly remind her again that he was a police officer, and a couple of times when he took her places, he reminded her that he had a shotgun, city issued shotgun, and he had his other weapon with him, and it was not positioned to outright intimidate her, but it was absolutely reminding her that she needs to know her place. And it was always in the, hey, don't forget, I always keep my weapon in that glove box. So Ha ha ha, don't forget that. He would continually remind her of his position of authority. And he would make public displays of that. He would often go to her place of work. She worked at a local restaurant that celebrated first responders, and so sometimes on his shift he would show up at the restaurant in his uniform, and the manager loved it. He'd come in and he'd come in to see her, and didn't matter how busy they were, the manager was loving this. Absolutely, go ahead and say hi, take a break. And it was a very subtle, not so subtle way of him reminding her that of what the power imbalance was. And when that manager would light up when he would show up at the restaurant, it very quickly reminded her that he's well respected by people, and so people are not going to believe her. He also reminded her at one point that you've cried rape before, so if you do it again, no one's going to believe you.
Oof.
And that was a pretty effective tactic for her to keep her in line.
What advice would you have to somebody who's listening to this episode, who's thinking, I don't even know how I would respond to my child? Can you speak a little bit to what you've learned, or in hindsight, now that you've lived that experience, tips you would give to a parent who maybe faces a disclosure from a child that they love and want to protect?
So anything I say, if you're in that situation, it doesn't matter anything that I say, because I know for myself, we often hear that expression of time stands still. Everything is so out of whack, and I remember that moment as if it was yesterday, and I needed to ask everyone to stop talking for a moment, and I could not wrap my head around this, because our brain in that situation doesn't know how to process something. The reason that we do fire drills in school is to develop some muscle memory, so that if you are in a fire, if that fire alarm goes off, you don't freak out. You have developed some memory of, I get up, I go here, I follow the teacher, I go out here in the playground. And it all seems silly, and we're like, that what's the point of this? But there's a method to that madness, so that you know what to expect. You learn that a trusted family friend and a member of law enforcement has been sexually assaulting your daughter. Ain't no playbook for that. And so it took me several moments to process that. After a few minutes, as I began to absorb what was being said to me, I had to step out of my daughter's room. I went into my bedroom. My wife came in, and it was, what do we do? What's our next step here? And so if you find yourself in that position, you're only going to be looking about 5 feet in front of you. You've got to get through that moment. It is to say it is a defining or significant moment in your life is the understatement of all statements. And so once my wife and I were able to process it, and we went back in and spoke to our daughter a little bit more, and she was okay with us reaching out to the police commissioner, and this is around midnight or something like that. And we had, because he had been on the walks and we had developed a friendship with him, we had his personal number, and we called him, and within 2 hours, we had 2 detectives in our kitchen taking, and as a dad, I'm immediately going into protection mode, and at that point, for days and days and days afterward, I am constantly looking out the windows to see, if there's anyone out in front of the house or down the street. I am trying to not make emotional responses and do things that would not be helpful or in my daughter's best interest. So, and fortunately, my wife helped to keep me in check, but that is not an easy thing. I'm not a violent guy, but all bets are off in that kind of a situation. And I had to be very, very mindful of my responses, how I reacted, because my daughter is watching everything I do and everything I say. And I am going to set the tone for her and how she responds. And at that moment, my number one priority is to let her know, one, I believe her. Two, I support her, that at the moment she's safe and that she is also in control of how we move forward. I think in a lot of cases, parents will say, okay, here's what needs to happen. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to contact the police. We're going to go to the hospital. We're going to do this, this, and this. And maybe your child does not want to do that. And while it is very well intentioned, parents have got to understand that your child has one experienced a significant trauma, and it is a trauma or a crime of power. They have had all of their control, all of their own power taken from them. And if my wife and I had decided, okay, here's what's going to happen, and this is what we're going to do, we're just adding to it. And so fortunately, we did have the wherewithal to pause and let her be part of that decision of how we move forward. But I'd be lying if I did not acknowledge that because of that first rape by a classmate, and now we're talking about a police officer that he groomed, as the situation was significantly different and the stakes were much higher, because we're talking about somebody that had access to all of us, had access to weapons, had along the way let our daughter know that he was able to track her movements, would let her know that he looked up this boyfriend or this girlfriend that she would hang out with and would do background checks. And so all of a sudden there were a lot of additional elements to this scenario that that had to be taken into account.
What is something that you would offer to maybe somebody who's listening who is in a situation but they can't quite put their finger on it? What hindsight do you want people to take from listening to our conversation today?
Yeah, trust your gut. So if something doesn't smell right, follow that. Parents have the right to know what's going on in their kids' lives. When I talk with other parents, it's important for them to understand, I don't want you to live in fear. I don't want you to assume that everyone that is in your child's life has bad intent. That's not true. However, it is okay for parents to ask questions about time spent together. It is okay to ask if there's going to be other people involved. It is okay for you as the parent to say, you know what? How about if I join you for bowling or ice cream? Wow. So I look back now, boy, I sure wish that I would have done that. Truthfully, I wanted this to be a positive thing. I wanted her to spend time with him because she was hurting so badly. As I said early on, we were seeing that sparkle in her eye again. And I think I chose to ignore things that I would have normally said, that ain't right. And so what I would say to parents is, don't shy away from your right as a parent. You can ask questions without being accusatory. You can ask questions out of curiosity. You can say no. You can invite yourself along, and you don't need to apologize for that because you're doing what's in the best interest of your kid. And no one loves your kid as much as you do. No one cares about your kid as much as you do. You know, kids can try our patience, and we can be furious with them and angry with them and still love them because we're parents, right? We see them for who they are, not for the behavior. And so we can ask questions, and we shouldn't apologize for that. We need to be willing to lean into these relationships. The people who are coming into our child's lives. Now, it's real easy when they're toddlers. We get to control that. As they get older, all we can do is hope that we have equipped them with the tools and the knowledge, but we still do have some influence. We can still, ask questions, have conversations. I think one of the most important things parents need to do is they need to make sure that they are having ongoing conversations. They need to create safe spaces for their kids. There's this tired joke about dads greeting the boyfriend or the prom date at the front door with a shotgun, and it's so cute. If you don't have my daughter home by 10 or 11, I'm going to get you. Ha ha ha, it's cute. Here's the problem with that. What you are saying to your daughter is all hell's going to break loose if he hurts you. And if he does hurt your child, how quick is your child going to be to come to you and say something happened? We can't just one time or repeatedly say, you can come talk to me about anything. You could say that all day long, but if your actions, if your behavior is not consistently letting your child know that, then you're just saying it for your own sake. You're saying it to make yourselves feel better so that if something were to happen, you can say, well, I told my kid that she could always come talk to me. It doesn't just happen. That safe space doesn't just happen with our words. It happens with our actions. And it has to happen consistently through small actions that demonstrate that. Your kid's going to screw up. Your kid's going to do dumb things. We all did dumb things when we were kids. Your kid is no different. And in those cases, we got to hold them accountable, but we also got to let them know we love them. Now, got to be really clear about this, though, Anna. In that sort of a situation, if your child did accept alcohol, if your child did accept drugs, it came from an adult. Your child has absolutely, positively no responsibility in that situation. Period. End of story. Hard stop. Sometimes parents feel like, well, okay, what happened was terrible, but you shouldn't have taken that alcohol. They were groomed. They were lied to. This is not their fault. And so that's going to be one of the reasons why kids are going to be afraid to come forward, because they did accept alcohol. They did accept the weed. They did, sneak out. They did do things that previously they were told they're not supposed to do. And so your kids got to know that if they come forward, the responsibility is 100% on that adult. And that is not the time for us to remind them, hey, don't be drinking, don't be smoking, whatever. Your kid was manipulated, your kid was exploited, your child was lied to. That's the issue. All of the other stuff was part of that playbook that we were talking about earlier. And we got to focus on the real issue here, not those things, because your child is still a child. They are susceptible to influence. They are susceptible. They don't have those critical thinking skills that we develop over time. And that's got to be part of the conversation, is letting them know, hey, something happens, you can come talk to me, and you're not going to be in trouble, period. And then the hard work begins, where you got to make sure that you're demonstrating that on an ongoing basis.
Something that I think is so unique about your family's experience is this individual was so well regarded in the community. And oftentimes when I speak to families of survivors, an element of fear to respond in action, whether legally or civilly, is community response to these allegations. Can you speak to a little bit about what your experience was when the community found out that this individual, this resource officer, this held in high regard individual was found guilty of everything that you all reported to the police?
So because it involved a police officer, it got picked up by the media, and our names were were sealed, so nobody knew who we were. But the community knew that who the officer was. They knew the details, some of the details. Every time there was a hearing or a filing, it typically would hit the paper. And so the articles would get posted online, and you're going through something incredibly traumatic, and now we've got all of these people out there that are going to be weighing in on it. Now, we were very fortunate that the responses online were mostly positive and supportive. There definitely were some people that had their own opinions. It's pretty easy to weigh in on a situation that you know nothing about, or you have a very small amount of information. It's kind of like that Monday morning quarterback saying, what I would do. What I dealt with often as the dad was these people saying, well, if it was my kid, I'd go get a gun. Well, it's not your kid, and you're not in that situation. And the message that is being screamed at in the family's ear is, if you loved your kid, you would deal with it with a gun. And online we tend to think that what we say is going out into the atmosphere and it has no consequence. But I had dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people telling me, who don't know me, don't know the situation, I need to go get a gun and I need to kill him. And again, not a violent guy, but all bets are off in this situation. And I have a gun, and for about 2 weeks, I kept the gun on my desk, and my wife had to talk me off that ledge repeatedly. Because all of a sudden, I'm listening to people that I don't know, that know nothing about me, but the voice in my head is amplifying what these people are saying, because I'm in a state of trauma. I am reeling, obviously, to a very different degree from what my daughter was dealing with. But, and I think it's important to note this, as parents, we are often going to downplay, diminish what we are experiencing because our kid's going through something. And quite frankly, yeah, our kid is the priority. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves that we're dealing with something also. That we have also been traumatized because we had somebody that we trusted lie to us, and not just lie to us on a small scale, but on a massive, massive scale. And so I'm not thinking clearly, and I keep thinking about maybe I need to go deal with this as all of these people think I should. And my wife is having to remind me that this is not about me. If I do that, I am not doing something that's in my daughter's best interest. I'm doing something for me. So we got to be really, really careful about that. Every decision, everything we do has to be through the lens of, is this in my daughter's best interest? Is this going to help her move forward? And if it's not, then don't do it. And we got to pause. We got to think through these decisions to make sure that we're making good decisions in the long term, not decisions 5 feet in front of us, but down the road.
And one of the things that makes this interview unique is that it's usually anonymous. And when you and I spoke before this interview began, you had a different request. And I think its origin is worth talking about because you have a position on what parents need to take away from this discussion. Being anonymous was not necessarily something that you prioritized. And I really respected what you said and wondered if you would share that with anybody who might be listening today.
So I'm happy to share my name. My name is Chris McGee. I live in York, Pennsylvania. If I'm going to share my name, I'm going to share the predator's name who did this. His name is Joseph Palmer, and he was a member of the York City Police Department. And I like sharing his name because I don't want him to get too comfortable under the rock that he's currently living under. But I wanted to share my name, Anna, because I have nothing to hide and shame about. I didn't do this. Joseph Palmer did this. He's the one that should be carrying this shame. Now, whether or not he does, that's up for him and his maker to figure out. But I was lied to. I was lied to. I was manipulated. My grief for my daughter and what she had experienced was exploited. So I'm not ashamed. I'm not embarrassed. I'm furious. I'm livid. And so we're talking today to share easily one of the worst experiences of my life so that another parent can learn from what happened. And I'm not going to be ashamed of this. Now, I want to be very clear. My daughter is in full support of this. She wants me to share our story. She is a young adult. She is 20 years old now. She is getting ready to launch and do her own thing. And I could not be more proud of her. I could not be more proud of all of my daughters. But she's ready to move forward. And I respect that. And I'm at a different stage of my life. And so I want parents in particular to know that they're not alone. They didn't screw up. They're not terrible parents. They were lied to. They were manipulated. And it's pretty hard to be looking for something that you didn't know you needed to be looking for. And so through your work and your excellent book and me screaming about what happened and wanting to share my story, I'm hoping some parents are going to start having some conversations about this and building awareness. And so I welcome parents to reach out to me. They can find me on my website, chrismcgee.com. And if they just need someone to talk to, it is the loneliest feeling in the world to be in this situation. And unfortunately, they are far from alone. This is happening so often. Obviously, because it involved a police officer, it's a little bit different. But the outcome, the aftermath, is very, very similar to every other survivor's story and parents' story of having to clean up after this mess. They're not alone. They're going to get through it. This is not going to define them, but I'm also not going to lie to you and say it's going to be easy. it is pretty tough, but that's why you find the resources. You find the people that can help you. You find people like you, like myself. I began reaching out to other people. I was able to connect with a couple other dads who have experienced similar situations and found support with them. So I'm not gonna hide about this. Um, I want parents to be aware of this and talking about this and not living in fear, but having a healthy bit of skepticism and just asking questions.
I love what you said earlier about staying curious, and curious parents have a willingness to say, I'm going to continue to explore why this person needs to be close to my child, or why this person needs one-on-one time with my child, or why this person needs a Snapchat connection with my child. And I think in today's society, it can be very challenging for parents to be that mom or that dad who shows curiosity, because it's often perceived as judgment, or you're being a helicopter parent. And I think you've done a wonderful job articulating just how critical it is, because predators stand out in the way that they behave. There were other individuals, the commissioner you spoke of earlier, who ran that program. That individual wasn't trying to come out of their role as a mentor. They stayed in that position. I think one of the things you can do from listening to your story, Chris, is stay in your role as an adult. Don't try to bring that child up to a peer level. Don't try to reduce yourself to a teen or a tween on their level. You've got to stay in your position of authority and respect the parents as the gatekeepers of where that child goes, what they do, and have deference to their decision making, rather than trying to usurp or manipulate or work your way around what those fences may be. Do you agree with that, or would you add on anything to that element, or correct me if I'm in the wrong direction?
I absolutely agree. Look, I think we're all just doing the best we can. I think while I think for the most part people are well intentioned, people are trying to figure out what those parameters are. A lot of people assume that I hate cops and I hate school resource officers, and that's not true. I have a lot of respect for police officers. Our situation could have looked so differently if we did not have the support of the police commissioner. That is, I can't overstate that one. But I now have a better understanding of the importance of those boundaries. I want to be part of the solution. I've actually begun reaching out to national school resource officer organizations to talk about boundaries, to talk about how to keep them safe and keep the child safe. How should parents be looking at the relationship with SROs and educating parents? My message is not burn the police departments down and don't talk to an SRO, because for the most part, they are good, hardworking, decent people that are trying to make the community a better place. But unfortunately, there's some really, really bad actors out there, and parents have got to be part of that solution, having conversations and asking. And again, as well intentioned as police officers and SROs and teachers and therapists and all of them, we are still the gatekeeper. We are still we set the guardrails for our kids, and we should not be apologetic about it, because it's with the intention of keeping our kids safe and doing what's in their best interest.
Well, Chris, I just have enormous respect for you and your family, and turning what your family went through into this platform and this education, and all of the ways in which you are shaping your local community and the wider nation is so impressive. And I want to thank you for being a part of Known and Trusted and for sharing your story.
Anna, I appreciate the opportunity to share our story. I am so grateful for the work that you do. We got to be having more of these conversations. Look, these discussions are not fun, but I guarantee you having the discussion and these conversations ahead of time rather than in a kitchen at 2 in the morning with detectives or with prosecutors or even in therapist offices are a hell of a lot more difficult. So I'm happy to share the story, and I appreciate all of the work you're doing. You may not do it, but I'm gonna plug your book for you. Parents need to be getting copies of Duck Duck Groom and sharing that. That is a gift. Actually, I've started doing it. I've purchased a few copies and shared them with young parents. Thank you for what you do.
If every young family, two young parents just starting out, if the what to expect when expecting also included a bit of Duck Duck Groom, we could put ourselves out of work. So
Wow.
that's my
Yeah,
goal.
wouldn't that be awesome? But we gotta start somewhere.
Yes, we do. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this. And I could not thank you more for your time and your honesty today.
Thank you, Anna.
This was an episode of Known and Trusted. Thank you for listening with care to a story that was once lived in silence. If it opened your eyes, share it with somebody you trust, because every conversation is a step toward protecting the next child. To learn more or to share your own story, visit annasonoda.com. Together, we can turn awareness into action.